And I checked today, now when you search for him, it comes up with a little info box about him on Google search results, and because they've linked that to other sources, you can now see lists of his books that previously weren't that obvious on Google. You have to kind of dig around to kind of find information. So that's a nice thing. That's something that I've done, contributed to, and it's now that author who was previously perhaps might have been overlooked has got a little bit more prominence. Wikipedia is part of the Wikimedia kind of suite of projects. Another related project is Wikidata, which is really just trying to do a similar thing to Wikipedia, but there's no content. You're not editing big articles. You're just adding facts and figures. So it's explicitly a database from the outset. So while Wikipedia was launched in 2001, Wikidata is quite new. It's launched in 2012. Still relatively small, but it's surprisingly rich. So you can just go along to Wikidata, sign up, and you can start adding information. So you can add something about your city, you can add something about your organization. Very easy to do. My second example is, again, something that you've probably heard of, OpenStreetMap. So this is a map of the world created by volunteers, launched in 2004. It's a very interesting example because there's a whole suite of other applications and tools that have sprung up around OpenStreetMap to make it easy for people to contribute to it and to use the data in different settings. So you can go to OpenStreetMap and you can contribute to it directly. I recently started to get involved in the project to kind of learn more about it. My expectation going in was that it would be quite technical, that I would need a GPS professional GPS device, and I would have to go out and walk streets and do kind of surveys. But that's not how it works. OpenStreetMap, certainly for a lot of I guess the more developed countries where they have large communities, that most of the core mapping work has been done. They've filled in most of the blanks of the map. What they want now is more detail. So actually, you can go to OpenStreetMap and you can just add locations. So you can add. It's very easy just to add a location of a pub, of a restaurant, and give some details about it. Very small, simple contributions. But they also lead you through the process of adding data and content in different ways. So you can start to add building outlines by tracing satellite imagery. They've got some really nice tools that just allow you to look at imagery from around the world and just draw and add buildings and locations. It's quite nice. It's quite a therapeutic thing to do. I've spent an evening with a few beers just kind of adding buildings to OpenStreetMap. It's like doing a adult colouring book, but instead of having a picture, you're creating a better map of the world. Right? It's great. But there's other ways. As I say, there's other ways that you can contribute to OpenStreetMap rather than just editing and working with the map directly. So there's a service called willmap.org, which is a database that sits on top of OpenStreetMap that tries to enrich it with information about wheelchair accessibility. So you can install Wheelmap as a mobile app, or you can use it in your browser. And they have a very simple traffic light system where you can just rate the location on how accessible it is to wheelchair users. They've got some great guidance around it, very easy to use. So we've been using this for a project in Bath called Accessible Bath. We got together a bunch of about, I think it was 25 volunteers one Saturday afternoon. We'd spent a couple of hours mapping, and we did 30% of the city centre. So that's kind of a really big leap into the quality of the information about wheelchair accessibility in the local area. There's other ways that you can contribute as well. You don't have to add information about your city or wherever you live. There's an awful lot of humanitarian mapping that happens around OpenStreetMap. So this is where the quality of the map needs to be improved, often quite rapidly, because there has been a disaster, flood or earthquake, or there's been a disease outbreak, and aid workers need better information about where the population is, where people live, so they can invest their efforts in the right areas. So there's a project called Missing Maps, where you can go along and you can volunteer to do edits to OpenStreetMap to add locations of small villages in Africa and other places. that then ultimately gets used in these aid efforts. And that's a really nice workflow. They get very clear about what your task is. They give you some tutorial guidance, and you can usually complete them in a few minutes, and you get almost instant feedback from the community on how well you're doing. There's also, related to it, is a service called MapSwipe. So what this is a mobile application which you can use online or offline. And what you do is you get presented with a grid of satellite images. And all you have to do is just click on an image if there's a building there, and then you swipe left and you do the next grid. And it's kind of gamified, so it encourages you to contribute. But what's happening behind the scenes is where you've identified a building, that becomes a task for somebody at the next layer in missing maps. So it means that the people who are volunteering their time to do the more detailed mapping are focused in the most useful locations. So there's lots of different ways that you can contribute. You can download a set of tasks from MapSwipe to use offline, so you can do it on your commute, you can do it on the tube, and just kind of improve the quality of the map as you go. So that's OpenStreetMap. My next example, which you may have heard of, is actually a family of projects that sit on a platform called Zooniverse, which is a citizen science project. Citizen science is about using crowdsourcing to create scientific data sets. Probably the most well-known example, I think it was their first, was Galaxy Zoo, where you can look at astronomical photos and help classify the astronomical objects, the galaxies that you see in the photos. And again, they lead you through the kind of process of what you need to be looking for and how you do the classification. They had 150,000 active users, did 50 million classifications, and all of the data then got published openly as part of a series of academic papers. But there's a whole collection of similar projects that run on Zooniverse. So if you're not interested in astronomy, you're interested in biology, then you can help the Natural History Museum catalogue its archive of insect specimens. So if you're interested in kind of digging into the dusty corners of a museum, then you can go through and you can help them do that cataloguing. And there have been cases of people finding new species just because somebody hadn't catalogued an organism right that was in some cupboard somewhere. So there's an opportunity to do some kind of really interesting things. One that I've been looking at and maybe contributing to is called Old Weather, which is a project to try and build a better data set of historical weather. And what it's doing is it's looking at scans of logs from ships, so whaling ships, for example. So the captain would have recorded every day what the weather was whenever he did the log entry. So what they're asking people to do is to look through the digitized logs and make a record of what the weather conditions were. And over time, that builds up a big data set of historical weather, which gives us more insight into historical climate. And it's a really nice kind of innovative use of historical documents. So my next example, which you may have heard of, is MusicBrainz, which launched in 2000. So this is a collaboratively produced music database. So it catalogues artists, releases, tracks, everything that surrounds kind of music information. It was originally started as a deliberate alternative to commercial data sets. There'd been some examples of people doing kind of collaborative cataloging on systems which then commercialized the data, took all of the kind of value away from it, and without giving anything back to the community that had created it. So MusicBrainz was kind of set up as an alternative, still running 17 years later, and it's grown a kind of commercial ecosystem around it. So MusicBrainz powers a lot of music services. I think it's used in Spotify, and it's been powering the BBC Music site for something like 10 years. So whenever you look at information about artists and track on the BBC site, this is where the data was coming from. And BBC staff contribute to MusicBrainz rather than creating their own data set, because it's easier and better to do that for everyone. If you're also interested in music, then you could also look at Discogs. So this is, again, another music data set, but where MusicBrainz is just focused on kind of, I guess, broader metadata. Discogs is about vinyl. So it's started as, and still is, a marketplace for record collectors, so they can buy and sell vinyl. But in order to power that marketplace, they needed needed a data set of vinyl releases. So they created a means for people to collaborate around creating that data set, and it's become more and more open over time. So it's now in the public domain. So that covers 7.7 million vinyl releases and all of the tracks and kind of metadata that goes around that. So another very, very rich data set. Another example, which you may have heard of, a little bit more obscure, is OpenPlax. So this is a smaller community of people, it's got about 1,600 photographers, who are photographing historical plaques that are on streets and buildings. So they're kind of blue plaques that commemorate that somebody lived in that place, or where a specific, where an interesting event happened. They share their photos onto the site along with some metadata, so the text of the plaque, who it mentions. So then they're building up this data set that kind of connects people and places. It's all linked out to Wikipedia, so you can kind of start to explore kind of the history of your area in a slightly different way. It's really nice, and it's a much more kind of niche example than some of the others. But I think it's great. It's just people who are interested in this as a subject just coming together to create an open resource. You probably haven't heard of this one. It's a slightly different example, but I had to include it because it was Lego. So this is a site called Rebrickable. What it does is they have a database of Lego sets. So they have all of the official Lego sets and which parts are in them. So they've got a very rich kind of data set there. But if you are a fan of Lego and you create your own custom models, then you can upload your model to the website in machine readable ways. And all of that data about your model is then exposed to anybody else that wants to use it. It's not under a formal open license, but it's available for commercial use just as long as you attribute the source. So you can do things like if you know that you've bought these official sets, then it can tell you that you can build these custom models that other people have provided instructions for. So you can kind of find other ways to use your parts. And again, I thought the reason I included this, other than the fact that it was Lego and I like Lego, is that it's a community that's just using open data for its own purposes. Really, there's no greater greater purpose behind it other than it just helps them achieve their immediate the immediate goal of sharing with one another. And my last example is also the oldest one. I'm not sure how many people have contributed to this, but it's been around since 1994. So this is the founders of this were originally using desktop database packages and sharing the data around on disks and things, rather than using the internet. But it's now been brought online. It's at comics.org. It's a database of comics. It's got 1.3 million comics in there, everything from the kind of Dandy and Beano all the way through to kind of all of the kind of Marvel, DC comics as well. So there's cover information about each comic. There's a whole series of story arcs. There's all the information about the writers and illustrators. Really deep kind of data set for people who are interested in comics. It's great. It's a great resource, and it's easy to contribute to. I checked, and this week's 2000 AD is already kind of in the catalogue, so people are still actively using it, even all this time on. So whatever your area of interest, pretty sure that there is an open data project that you could contribute to. And if there isn't, then there's always Wikipedia, which will take basically anything. So what I think is interesting about these projects, as I say, is that open data is not really kind of driving economic growth, or it's really as an enabler for these communities. Open licensing is creating a level playing field for everyone who's contributing. So it means that if you or I contribute to that data set, we both have as much rights in the output as the output. So anyone contributing can take that data at any time and do whatever they want with it. So it creates a so it creates a level playing field so that everyone is contributing on the same basis. It means that the data, the community's efforts isn't going to get locked away by a commercial organisation. And I think that creates a level of trust that encourages participation. I think that's one of the reasons why some of these projects have been around for as long as they have, even if they're maybe not that visible, is because they're kind of using open as a key part of what they're doing. One of the reasons I think they're interesting is they're also really good examples of different ways of working with data on the web. Because they're community projects, they've got people contributing from around the world, highly distributed, they have to think through what it means to engage with communities, to take edits and contributions from people with different skill sets, different backgrounds, different levels of knowledge, and incorporate that into their data. So it's really interesting to look at them from that perspective to see what we might be able to learn from it, to take it into some of the other areas where open data is useful, so in the government context, in commercial space. So there's a lot in here, a lot of kind of useful patterns. This kind of much broader ecosystem of tools that support kind of edits. We often say in the open data community that make things open and it makes them better. It's one of the GDS design principles. And if we do make things open, it does make them better in the sense that more people can look at them, more people can use them, and they can point out problems. But we can go a step further. If we put that open data into a collaborative environment, then the community can make it better immediately, rather than hoping that they will that you will take on whatever their suggested improvements are. It becomes a more collaborative resource that I think then can move at a faster pace. So I think sometimes we have to think a little bit more about what infrastructure we're putting open data into in order to kind of get the maximum amount of benefits from it. I think something else that kind of occurred to me when I was kind of certainly putting together some of the data for the slides was how old some of the projects are. So clearly they're sustainable, so that's interesting in itself. But how few there were that have been started recently. You might have expected that lots of these would have been started in the last few years. And I was trying to figure through why that was. Whether it's just because we've been focusing our open data efforts on government, on commercial businesses, and so we're not really supporting or encouraging this type of work, or whether it reflects the changing way that we use the web. Lots of these services started around the kind of Web 2.0 kind of height, where it was more about sharing in a much more kind of richer sense in terms of sharing bookmarks and photos and music playlists, whereas now we're mostly kind of posting to Facebook and social media and liking things, and it's a different interaction model, and it kind of feels like we might have lost something along the way. So I kind of like to push people to kind of look at these projects, because I think there's some value in that, because really the web was started to share what we know, and this is what these communities are doing. There's also lots of untapped resources. So in putting together my list of potential services you could use, there were a lot that I had to discount because they don't produce open data. The community is either not using an open license, or they've kind of decided not to think about the licensing because it's difficult. And that means that I think there are some resources out there that could benefit from a bit of kind of encouragement or activism to make them become more open, or suggest that they become more open, because they may be able to unlock a bit more value from what they're doing as a community. There's also openly licensed content online, which could be processed to create more structured data. So one example I have there is it's similar to the Wikipedia example. So there's a service called Wikia. It was originally called WikiCities when it was launched. It was founded by Jimmy Wales just after he'd launched Wikipedia, and it's a wiki environment. So anyone can go along, you can sign up for free on the site, and you can create your own wiki. So if you're interested in in a film or a TV series or a series of books, you can just go and create a wiki around it, and you can get other people to add to it. And the conditions of using the free software is that everything you put in there is under an open license. It's all under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. So it's all open licensed content. There are 360,000 of these wikis. There's 190 million people look at them every month. There's a total of 43 million pages of content, which is the same size as the English Wikipedia. So there's a lot of content there. Most of these wikis have info boxes, have structured information on them exactly the same as Wikipedia does. But so far, nobody has yet kind of done that same step that we've done for Wikipedia, of turning it into structured data. And I think that would be a really great thing to do, to kind of bring these kind of these kind of fan-based kind of wikis into the Open Data Commons, into the web of data, the same as we are kind of publishing other sources. So that's something that I'd like to dig into in a bit more detail at some point. So that brings me to the end of my talk. So thank you for listening. Hopefully I've told you about at least one project that you hadn't heard of, and maybe inspired you to contribute or look a bit deeper at them. So thank you very much.
Cool, thanks, Leigh. Are there any questions from the audience?
Can I just kick off with one, Leigh? Do you have any personal projects that you're working on at the moment? Any personal passions that you're turning into open data?
I've got a couple. So I run a local community group called Bath Hacks. So we're running a whole series of projects around that, which is focused on publishing data for our community. So I've mentioned Accessible Bath as one. We're also doing a project called Energy Sparks, which is helping going to help schools be more energy efficient by encouraging them to open up their energy usage data. So there's those. More personal projects. I'm currently looking at ways to get data out of the Internet Archive. So they have scans of lots of content, and they've got this really rich archive of historical computer magazines. My first computer is a Spectrum. That's where I started my kind of computing career. They have all of the magazines that I bought from the magazine rack from there. There's not a huge amount of data around it, but also it's not that visible, or it could be more visible anyway, in my opinion. So I'm currently kind of extracting some of the content and metadata that it have, and looking at ways to make it more widely available. I've also taken some openly licensed book scans from British Library. So they have there's 3 books that have got historical playbills for the theatre in Bath. So I've extracted all the images from that, and I'm trying to work out the best kind of collaborative environment to help people catalogue that, so that we get a kind of sense of that local history.
Any other questions? Follow up from me then. So you've mentioned with a lot of the projects that it involves history in some way, so historical playbills for the theatre. Mm-hmm. Do you think that for historians this will lead to doing history in different ways using data?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's there's a lot of interesting work that's happening around the kind of archives and museum space around open data, because individual museums only have their own kind of view of history, so they need to bring it together to help kind of scholars do that kind of analysis. So I think there's some really interesting fertile territory there.
Great, thanks. Anything else, Krista?
No, not yet. I've got another one though.
All right, go for it.
Sorry. How do you get people who are passionate about something how do you get them started with sharing their data, and kind of how do you encourage them to do it and show them how easy it is?
That's a good point. So I think some of these projects, I think it's really just showing we're all passionate about something, whether it's kind of music or books or what have you. In some cases, I think it's just showing people that there is ways to kind of engage with a wider community of people who are also passionate about the same things in a way that will actually produce some resource rather than just kind of geeking out over it. That there's some ultimate purpose. I mean, from the local projects I'm doing, again, people are kind of passionate about doing something for their community, and often, again, it's just providing an easy way for them to get involved. So I was really amazed with the reception that we had for the Accessible Bath project. So we put a lot of effort into working out how to give people clear tasks, clear instructions, support on using wheel maps. So we did a bit of training and kind of workshops to kind of get people up to speed. And people just turned up and they went away and they did it. So sometimes it's just a process of asking can be and showing what the results will be is enough.
Thank you.
So just had press. So of course I've heard of Wikipedia, but the vast majority of the projects you put out, I hadn't heard of them before. So I'm just curious how the open plaques work. Is it just someone literally goes and takes a picture of a plaque that they've seen and some post it onto the website? Is that
you can post it to the website. You can I think you can also post it on Flickr and other photo sites and kind of bring that into open plaques as well. So, yeah.
Thanks. Is there anything else from the audience? Alright, then I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Leigh, for that really interesting talk. And yeah, there's tea and coffee here. Thank you very much for coming and have a great Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.